Kia ora koutou katoa. The progressive author Matthew DiStefano recently penned a piece about Vladimir Putin's Christianity. Putin's of the Russian Orthodox faith, and while his sincerity has been questioned by some in his former inner circle, the leaders of that denomination don't. They've even called him a miracle of God. It's hard to equate the man who is currently authorizing the bombing of various cities across Ukraine and killing many in the process, including, of course, non-combatants, with a follower of the one who said, "Love your enemies and love your neighbour as yourself." Mind you, looking back over history, Putin would not have been the first autocrat to proudly identify as Christian and yet murder innocents. There are Christian theologies that justify murder. Bad theologies. In the past, I have been publicly critical of Patriarch Kirill, leader of the Russian Orthodox Church, and see no reason now to change my opinion. He mistakes the ideology of Russian nationalism and expansionism to be God's will. Allegiance to your homeland can distort your Christianity, as can cuddling up to autocrats and other rich and powerful persons in order to have their patronage. A week ago, Kirill wrote to an archbishop of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church saying, "The termination of the commemoration of the primate of the Church," that religious language means that they're ceasing to pray for Kirill, he's the primate, "and have ceased not because of doctrinal or canonical errors or delusions, but because of discordance with certain political views and preferences, like the bombing the heck out of them. This, says Kirill, is a schism, for which anyone who commits it will answer before God, not only in the age to come, but also in the present." See, the Patriarch sees cessation of prayer for himself, their leader, as not only disloyalty, but the sin of schism, for which there are allegedly eternal consequences. The danger in cuddling up with the powerful is that you start to emulate them, with Kirill mistaking allegiance to the faith as allegiance to himself. Putin shares the same mistake, seeing criticism of himself as criticism of Russia. Disloyalty, treason can be the charge. Time and again, men in power fall into the error of seeing criticism of themselves as criticism of their organization or country or church, and seek to punish the critics. This is the theology of egotism. I wonder, as numbers of dead soldiers start arriving back in their Russian homeland, whether the alignment of church and state will begin to falter. Unfortunately, with the theology of egotism in the ascendancy, I doubt it. But note, there are many Russians opposed to the invasion of Ukraine, and many taking risks and speaking up, speaking out, getting out on the streets. And some are being arrested, and worse. You have to be tough to be a protester in Russia. There are priests among them too, like Father Johan Burden. He was arrested for preaching in such a way that allegedly discredited the country's army. Like 250 fellow priests who wrote an open letter critical of the invasion. When your fellow citizens in the military are murdering your neighbours, some your Orthodox Christian neighbours, can you, as a Christian, a priest, remain silent? If they did, the very stones would cry out. Make no mistake, the church Christianity is on trial here. There is no neutral ground. You either align your faith with the hierarchy, like Kirill, who are trying to justify the invasion of a neighbouring country and murder many of its citizens, or you protest. You either align with the bad theology that kills your neighbour, or the good theology that tries to protect your neighbour. Kevin Garcia, an American spiritual director, has written a book titled Bad Theology Kills. He's referring to the toxic ideas within many churches and actions arising from such toxicity that has destroyed the lives of queer people, people of colour, women, and many who revolt against being, to quote Pink Floyd, another brick in the wall. Bad theology can kill. And it's killing right now in Ukraine as one group of Christians follow the orders of Putin, the hope for the world, as he was called by some American Christian leaders. Follow Putin to expand their homeland, and another group of Christians of the same denomination defend their homeland. Theology that does not criticize the actions of the powerful when they seek their own ends to hurt and destroy others is bad theology. Theology that does not stand up to bullies is bad theology. Theology that tells us to think about ourselves, our salvation, what's best for us, rather than encourages us to think about others, the salvation of all, what is best for all, is bad theology. Theology that prioritizes the Trinity of me, myself, I is bad theology. Theology that is afraid to tell us to make do with less, to not give in to the desire to acquire, to aggrandize, to own, as if this is what brings security, is bad theology. Theology premised on possessing, land, loot, loyalty, is bad theology. And bad theology makes bad neighbours. You can't love your neighbour when you're seeking your own good, when you use bullying tactics, when you're motivated by the desire to have more and your neighbour less. How do we know bad theology is bad? Well, simply it brings harm to people's lives. It doesn't bring love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, to quote St. Paul. Instead, it brings hate, fear, strife, greed, jealousy, egotism, dominance, war, and death. Bad theology is not necessarily the conservative doctrines that Christians have long debated. You know, doctrines like the virgin birth, or the physical resurrection, or the ascension, or eternal judgment. There are a lot of good people who believe these doctrines, which I've long discarded. Bad theology doesn't mean theology different from mine, heaven forbid. But giving such conservative doctrines a divinely infallible, unchangeable status can lead to not only just increasing irrelevancy in the modern scientific age, but to a potential toxicity when taken and applied literally. If words about God, theology, are divorced from the social and political realities in which people live, such words, theology, are at best irrelevant, and at worst used as tools, as myths, as manipulative ideas to keep the subjugated submissive, to keep the lowly low, and to keep the powerful in power. In the end, what I'm talking about here today is simply being a good neighbour. A good neighbour respects those over the fence, respects their differences, engages with their ideas, supports them in their needs and vulnerabilities, and looks for opportunities to break bread and share joy together. A good neighbour cares about the whole neighbourhood, building an ethos of care and cooperation, looking after the trees, the birds, the land, so that in years to come others will continue to benefit from this neighbourhood. A good neighbour knows that the whole neighbourhood is important. As Abhijit Nassar said in our reading this morning, stop this mine and yours thinking. Stop the tribalism that believes I'm better, that my God, my culture, my way is superior. Stop the tribalism that builds suspicion of the neighbour, that builds walls of distrust and the toxicity of envy. Stop the tribalism that leads to quarrel, strife, and to killing. Instead, embrace the our planet, our neighbourhood, our survival. To love your neighbour as yourself, as both Judaism and Christianity exhort, you must find the great love in yourself, which is not threatened by the other, by difference or by change. You must find that great love within yourself, knowing that you are worthy of such love, not because of anything you own, have done, or have inherited. This is a love that doesn't need egotism. It doesn't need to beat others or bolster itself with adoration. This is a love that wants to give, to be in mutual relation, to be a friend as well as a neighbour to those over the fence. Good theology is being a good neighbour. Bad theology kills those over the fence.